Every guest at the Whitmore supper party had heard Gerald Fenton call his wife worthless, but only the footman standing behind the dessert trolley saw Rowena's hands go still in her lap, not trembling, simply stopping, the way a clock stops when the mechanism has been wound one turn too far. "She's worthless," Gerald said again, louder this time, as though the word improved with repetition. He addressed it to the table at large, 14 faces arranged along damask and silver, in the Whitmore dining room in Bath, December of 1889. Came with nothing, brought nothing, produces nothing. I have been extraordinarily patient. The candelabra threw his shadow long across the tablecloth. Rowena Fenton, née Ashworth, aged 31, who had once spoken 3 languages and managed her father's accounts before the bankruptcy that had delivered her into Gerald's indifferent hands, straightened her cutlery, fork, knife, spoon. She aligned each piece with the edge of the plate as though preparing a lesson. "You are confusing worth with income, Gerald," she said, her voice carrying the precise enunciation of a woman who had spent 4 years as a governess before her marriage. "They are different words. I could diagram the distinction for you, but I should hate to hold up the pudding." Someone at the far end choked on wine. Gerald's mouth became a blade. His face was handsome in the way of men who have never been told no. Symmetrical, unused, untested. He turned to Mr. Whitmore on his left. "You see what I endure." Rowena did not look down. She looked at the doorway, where a figure had paused, tall, dark-coated, arriving late. The Whitmore's mysterious neighbor from Langford Hall, whom nobody in Bath had met properly, and everyone had discussed endlessly. Lord Cassius Vale. He stood motionless in the threshold. His skin was pale in a way that suggested not illness but absence, as though sunlight had simply stopped trying. His coat was immaculate, his cravat pinned with a single dark stone. His chest, she noticed with the observational reflex of a former governess trained to watch her charges for fever, did not rise. She noted this. She set it aside the way she set aside odd verb conjugations her students produced. Filed, not yet corrected. His eyes moved across the table. Across Gerald. Across the dessert. Landed on Rowena with the quality of something that had been looking for a long time and had only just found. She had seen those eyes before, 7 years ago in her father's library in London, the night before the creditors came. A man who had arrived with her father's solicitor, who had looked at the shelves of books and then at her, the daughter cataloguing them for sale, and said, very quietly, "You handle them as though they are friends." She had never forgotten his face. She had been 24. He had not aged a single day. He was not looking at her now the way one looks at a stranger. He was looking at her the way one looks at a clock that has stopped, wondering what it would take to start it again. Mr. Whitmore rose. "Lord Vale, how good of you to come. We had nearly given up hope." Lord Vale did not answer Whitmore. He walked into the room with the unhurried certainty of a man who had never needed to rush in his life, or in several lives, and stopped beside Rowena's chair. Every head turned. Gerald's mouth opened, producing nothing. "Worthless," Lord Vale said, as though tasting the word. His voice was low, carrying the faint grain of disuse, decades of it compressed into a single syllable. He looked at Gerald. "How much?" The table went silent. Not the polite silence of a pause between courses, but the held breath silence of 14 people who understood that something had shifted and could not be unshifted. Gerald blinked. "I beg your pardon? You declared your wife worthless in front of witnesses," Lord Vale said. "If she has no value to you, then you will not object to my offer. Name your terms for releasing her from the marriage. I will meet them." Rowena's hand closed around the handle of her dessert spoon, not because she was afraid, because something inside her chest, something she had wrapped carefully in muslin and stored on a high shelf 7 years ago, had just been taken down without her permission. "This is absurd," Gerald said, but his voice had climbed half an octave, and the woman beside him shifted her chair slightly away. "Most transactions are," Lord Vale said. "That rarely prevents them." He turned to Rowena then, and his expression changed. The commanding lines softened into something almost careful, almost tender. The face of a man handling a book he was afraid to damage. "Forgive the theater," he said, only to her. I could not listen to another word. Rowena looked at him. She looked at the way the candlelight stopped at his skin instead of warming it. She looked at his hands, which were perfectly still. No fidgeting, no pulse visible at the wrist. "You were in my father's library," she said. 7 years ago, the night before we lost everything." Something moved behind his eyes. Not recognition, not yet. Confusion, like a man searching an enormous house for a door he had forgotten existed. "I have been in many libraries," he said. "You told me I handled the books as though they were friends." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, very softly, "You were cataloging them for auction. You were crying, but only on one side of your face, as though you had given yourself permission to grieve with half and work with the other." He remembered. The footman behind the dessert trolley, a thin, quiet man named Phelps, who had worked 6 houses in Bath and kept his opinions folded as neatly as napkins, watched Lord Vale's face and thought, with the certainty of someone who had served hundreds of dinners, "That man has not breathed once since he entered the room." Phelps said nothing. He filed it away. Gerald Fenton did not agree to anything that evening. He sputtered, reddened, and demanded that Lord Vale leave. Lord Vale left, but not before pressing his card into Rowena's hand with a sentence that landed like a key turning in a lock. "Langford Hall has a library. It needs someone who treats books as friends. The position is yours if you want it." 2 days later, Rowena walked out of the Fenton townhouse with 1 trunk, her teaching certificates, and the address of a solicitor who had agreed, at Lord Vale's expense, to begin separation proceedings. Gerald had not tried to stop her. Gerald, it seemed, was relieved to be rid of the evidence of his cruelty. Langford Hall was older than it should have been. The stones of the front steps were worn in the center by centuries of feet, and the air inside smelled of beeswax and something darker. Old paper, cold stone, the faint mineral tang of a house that had been closed too long. Rowena paused in the entrance hall and corrected her posture. Spine straight, shoulders settled, the way she had taught her students to stand before recitation. Phelps appeared. He had, it turned out, been in Lord Vale's employ for 9 years before his secondment to the Whitmore household for the season. He stood at the foot of the staircase with the composed stillness of someone who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "Mrs. Fenton," he said, "Lord Vale asked me to show you the library. He also asked me to mention that the east corridor is not in use and should be avoided after dark. I expect that will only make you more curious, so I shall say nothing further." Rowena studied him. "You are remarkably forthcoming for a footman, Mr. Phelps. I find that withholding information from intelligent women only delays the inevitable and makes my life harder," Phelps said. "The library is this way." The library was immense. 3 stories of books connected by a wrought iron spiral staircase, with windows that faced west and let in the last of the winter light. Rowena touched the spine of a folio on the nearest shelf and felt the leather give under her thumb, old and well kept. A first edition. She moved to the next. Another. The entire shelf was first editions, arranged not by title or author, but by date of acquisition, as though someone had simply placed each book where there was room, over decades, over centuries. She began cataloging in her head. The instinct was automatic, the governess in her sorting and classifying before she could stop herself. 16th century. 17th. A psalter that belonged in a museum. A pamphlet from 1648 with a handwritten annotation in the margin that said, in faded ink, "I was there." The handwriting matched the note on Lord Vale's card. Something cold settled at the base of her spine. Not fear. Recognition. The governess's reflex. When the evidence does not fit the lesson, revise the lesson. Lord Vale appeared in the doorway. "You have found the pamphlet. You wrote, 'I was there,' in the margin of a document from 1648, Rowena said, keeping her voice level, pedagogical, as though correcting an irregular verb. "That is either a very poor joke or a very large truth." "It is not a joke," he said. She waited. He did not elaborate. She did not push. Instead, she pulled a notebook from her trunk, opened it to a clean page, and wrote at the top, "Anomalies." Beneath it she wrote, "Does not breathe. Skin temperature, absent. Handwriting, 240+ years consistent. Library, personal acquisition spanning centuries." She held it up for him to see. "I was a governess," she said. "I keep notes." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, as though smiling was a language he had once spoken and was remembering the grammar. The first letter from Gerald's solicitor arrived 3 days into her tenure at Langford Hall. It was polite, precise, and devastating. Gerald had no intention of granting a separation, and furthermore, he claimed that Rowena had stolen household silver when she departed. A formal complaint had been lodged with the local magistrate. Rowena read the letter in the library, standing beside the window where the light was best, and when she had finished, she folded it into thirds, the way her mother had folded napkins for guests who never came, and set it on the desk. "He is lying," she said to Phelps, who had brought the letter on a tray and was now standing near the door with the expression of a man who already knew what was inside. "Of course he is," Phelps said. "Mr. Fenton's household silver has not been polished in 2 years. I doubt he could identify the pattern." "He wants to force me back," Rowena said. "If I am accused of theft, the separation proceedings collapse. I become the villain." Phelps was quiet for a moment. "Shall I inform Lord Vale?" "Not yet." Rowena opened her notebook. Beneath anomalies, she started a new heading. "Gerald. I need evidence that the silver is still in his house. I need someone who has seen it." "His cook," Phelps said. "Mrs. Darnley. She has worked that kitchen for 12 years and can describe every piece to the scratch. She is also deeply unhappy." Rowena looked at him. "You know the cook." "I know everyone's cook," Phelps said. "Cooks talk to footmen. It is the foundational relationship of English domestic life." That evening, Lord Vale found Rowena in the library writing letters. She had pulled 3 reference volumes on property law from the shelves and was cross-referencing them with her notebook, her handwriting growing smaller and more precise the angrier she became. He stood in the doorway. She did not look up. but she knew he was there. The room changed when he entered, the way a room changes when a window is opened in winter. The temperature shifted. The air moved. "You are angry," he said. "I am annotating," she said. "It is different." He came closer. She could feel the cold radiating from him. Not unpleasant, but specific, like standing near a marble pillar. He looked at her notebook, at the list of anomalies, at the section labeled Gerald, at the careful, furious handwriting. "You are thorough," he said. "I am a governess. Thoroughness is the entire profession." She set down her pen. "Lord Vale, you do not breathe. You have not eaten in the 3 days I have been here. The pamphlet in your library is annotated in your handwriting and dated 1648. I have a list, and it is growing. I see that. I am not asking you to explain tonight. But I will ask, and when I do, I would prefer the truth to a performance." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You handled my books as though they were friends. That is why I remembered you." She looked up at him. His eyes were dark gray, the color of river stones, and they held something she recognized from her own mirror. The careful blankness of someone who had been alone so long that company felt like a foreign country. "You remembered one side of my face crying and the other side working," she said. "Yes." "Then you understand me better than my husband ever did." She returned to her annotations. He remained in the doorway watching her, and Phelps, passing in the corridor with a tray, noted that Lord Vale's hands, which had been still as stone for 9 years, were now fidgeting with the edge of his cuff. Gerald's second attack came 11 days later, and it was not a letter. It was Gerald himself, arriving at a charity lecture at the Assembly Rooms in Bath, where Rowena had been invited. At Lord Vale's quiet insistence, to speak on the education of young women. She was mid-sentence, standing at the lectern with her notes arranged in the order that had once kept 30 restless students attentive. When Gerald walked in through the side door, he was not alone. He had brought Mr. Whitmore, 2 members of the local vestry, and a woman Rowena recognized as Lady Ashcroft, who controlled most of the charitable appointments in the county. "This woman," Gerald said, loudly enough to carry, "is my wife. She abandoned our household, stole from our home, and is now living under the protection of a man she barely knows. I would not trust her to educate a terrier, let alone young women." The room shifted. 200 faces rearranged themselves along the spectrum between scandal and sympathy, and Rowena felt the familiar compression, the instinct to shrink, to absorb, to go quiet and endure. She gripped the edge of the lectern. The wood was smooth under her palms, real and solid. "Mr. Fenton," she said, and her voice carried as clearly as his had, "you told a table of 14 people that I was worthless. If I am as valueless as you claim, I cannot imagine why you have followed me to a lecture on pedagogy, unless you have finally developed an interest in education, in which case you may take a seat. There is one near the back." The room exhaled. Someone in the 3rd row made a sound that might have been a laugh pressed behind a glove. Gerald reddened. Lady Ashcroft touched his arm, murmuring something. He shook her off. "I will have you brought home," he said. "I will have your position revoked. I will ensure that no household in England will employ you. You are nothing without thy name." "Curious," Rowena said. "I seem to recall having a name of my own before I took yours. It was Ashworth. My father was Theodore Ashworth. He taught me to manage accounts, read contracts, and recognize a man who measures a woman's worth by what she costs him." From the back of the room, Lord Vale's voice carried, low, unhurried, the cadence of a man who did not need volume to command attention. "She is not yours to retrieve, Mr. Fenton. She is not property." Gerald turned. Whatever he saw in Lord Vale's face, and several people later reported that his expression was not angry but ancient, the face of someone who had watched empires rise and fall and found this small cruelty beneath all of them, made him step back. "This is not finished," Gerald said. He left with his entourage. Lady Ashcroft paused at the door to look back at Rowena with an expression that was not sympathy but calculation, the look of a woman deciding which side to stand on. Rowena's hands were shaking. She set them flat on the lectern and waited until they stopped. Then she turned back to her notes and said, "Now, where was I?" Page 3. The importance of teaching young women that their voices carry. The room applauded, and Lord Vale, standing at the back, watched her with the expression of a man who had spent centuries looking for something and was terrified of having found it. That night, she entered the East Corridor. She had not intended to. Phelps's warning had been specific, but a draft had pushed open a door she was passing, and behind it was a gallery of paintings arranged chronologically along the wall. Faces she did not recognize, houses that no longer stood. And at the far end, a painting of a man standing beside a woman in Tudor dress, his hand on the back of her chair, his face exactly as it was now. The plaque read, "Lord Cassius Vale and Lady Margaret Vale, 1558. Rowena stood before it for a long time. She counted the years in her head, the governess reflex, numbers providing structure when the world tilted. 331 years. She added it to her notebook. She did not go to find him. She needed to tell him something. Not now. Not yet. But soon. Because the reason she had accepted his offer, the real reason beneath the library and the position, was a letter from her father's solicitor, the late Mr. Aldous Penn. A letter claiming that a deed of transfer existed somewhere in this house, proof that her father's business partner had defrauded him, that the bankruptcy was manufactured, that Theodore Ashworth had died in poverty because someone stole his company. She had come looking for a document. The position was real. Her need was real. But the seed of it was deception, and she could feel it growing heavier with every day she spent in his library, accepted his tea, felt the cold of him in the doorway like something she was learning not to mind. She said nothing. She turned the page. She did not tell him that night. She told Phelps instead, standing in the kitchen at midnight, with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. "There is a document," she said. "A deed of transfer. My father's solicitor believed it was in this house, in the library. I have been looking for it since I arrived." Phelps set down the cloth he was folding. "You came here under false pretenses. I came here under incomplete pretenses. The position is real. What I feel is real. But the seed of it was a dead man's letter, and I have not told Lord Vale. You must. I know, but not yet. I have not found the document." Phelps was quiet for a moment. "The document you seek is not in the library. I have organized every paper in this house over 9 years, but I know where it is." He paused. "Mr. Gerald Fenton's solicitor, Mr. Harwood, was also your father's business partner's solicitor. The deed of transfer went through Harwood's office. His files are stored in the basement of Gerald's townhouse because Harwood is too cheap to rent his own archive space." Rowena set down the cup. "Gerald has the proof that my father was defrauded in his own house. Gerald likely does not know what he has. He has never been a man who reads documents. Phelps stood. "The cook, Mrs. Darnley, can get you into the basement. She owes me a considerable favor involving a missing ham at Christmas." On the following Tuesday, Rowena went to see Gerald's cook. Mrs. Darnley was a broad, capable woman with flour on her apron, and opinions she had been storing for 12 years. She had liked Rowena when Rowena was married to Gerald, because Rowena had thanked her for meals, a courtesy Gerald had never extended. "He's hosting a dinner next Tuesday," Mrs. Darnley said, "for Lady Ashcroft and the vestry. Wants to prove he's the respectable one. The basement is accessible through the kitchen during service. I can keep the door unlocked." But Rowena needed more than the document. She needed witnesses. She needed Gerald's accusation of theft disproven and her father's fraud proven, all in one stroke, or Gerald would simply destroy the evidence and start again. She wrote to Lord Vale. The letter was 3 sentences long. "I was wrong to deceive you. I am not wrong about the fraud. If you can stand to be in the same room as me, I could use an ally at Gerald Fenton's dinner on Tuesday." The reply came the next morning, delivered by Phelps, who had clearly read it and was trying not to look satisfied. It said, "I will attend. Bring your evidence. Do not expect forgiveness. Expect support." It was enough. It was not everything, but it was enough. Gerald Fenton's dinner party was arranged with the specific intention of cementing his reputation as the wronged husband. 14 guests, including Lady Ashcroft, 2 vestrymen, and Mr. Whitmore, were seated around the same damask-covered table where he had first called his wife worthless. Rowena arrived uninvited, wearing her best dress, the gray silk she had bought with her own governess wages, and carrying a leather satchel. Lord Vile arrived 2 minutes later, his presence in the doorway producing the same held-breath silence it had the first time. Gerald rose from his chair. "You are not welcome here. I am here to return something you lost," Rowena said. "Your honesty." She opened the satchel. Inside were 3 things. A letter from Mrs. Darnley describing every piece of household silver, confirming it was present and accounted for in Gerald's pantry. A signed statement from Phelps, describing Gerald's public declaration of her worthlessness, witnessed and dated, and the deed of transfer from Harwood's files, the document that proved Rowena's father, Theodore Ashworth, had been defrauded of his business by his partner, who had used Harwood as the intermediary. She had found the deed in the basement, exactly where Phelps had said it would be. All of it, including the final page, the one bearing the partner's signature, which had been misfiled in Harwood's personal correspondence in a locked drawer in Gerald's study. Mrs. Darnley had provided the key. Rowena had copied the page by candlelight while Gerald snored 2 floors above. Gerald stared at the documents. "Where did you get those?" "From your own house," Rowena said. "Filed in your own solicitor's archive. You never read them, Gerald. You never read anything." The room reconfigured itself. Lady Ashcroft leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore set down his glass. The vestrymen exchanged glances. Rowena's hands were steady. The governess in her knew that a lesson delivered with trembling hands lost half its authority. She placed the documents side by side and let the table look. "My father was Theodore Ashworth," she said. "He was defrauded of his business, his home, and his reputation by a man who used this document to steal everything. My husband knew. His solicitor facilitated the theft. And when I sought to leave a marriage built on that foundation, my husband accused me of stealing silver." She looked at Gerald. "I did not steal your silver, Gerald. I was never interested in your silver. I was interested in the truth." Gerald opened his mouth. No sound came out. He looked at Harwood's signature, at Lady Ashcroft's expression. at the 14 faces that had once listened to him call his wife worthless, and were now looking at him with something far worse than anger, comprehension. Lord Vile spoke from the doorway. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The woman you call worthless has just exposed a fraud that spans a decade, assembled testimony from people you never bothered to notice, and presented it to a room full of witnesses while wearing a dress she bought with money she earned. He paused. You asked me once what she was worth. I will tell you now. She is worth every room she walks into. She is worth more than anything I have acquired in 300 years of collecting. The room held its breath. Rowena looked at him. The anger she had felt, at his secrecy, at the concealment, was still there, but it was no longer the only thing. Beside it was something else. The recognition that he had come when she asked, had stood beside her instead of in front of her, had let her fight her own battle while making certain she did not fight it alone. You still owe me the truth about the breathing, she said. I will tell you everything, he said. Every year, every name, every loss. If you will stay, I will stay on one condition, she said. No more locked libraries? Agreed. Phelps, standing beside the dessert trolley for the second time in this dining room, allowed himself a single, infinitesimal nod. Finally, he said, to no one in particular. 3 months later, on a morning in early March, the library at Langford Hall smelled of beeswax and fresh ink. Rowena had reorganized the entire first floor by author and century, a project that had required moving 400 volumes and discovering. Behind a false shelf on the second story, a collection of handwritten journals spanning from 1560 to 1887, every entry in Cassius's hand. She was reading the entry from 1648, the one that matched the pamphlet, when he appeared in the doorway with tea. He had learned to make tea. It had taken him 3 weeks and 2 shattered teapots, and Phelps had watched the entire process with the expression of a man witnessing a historical event. You have reached the Civil War, Cassius said, setting the cup beside her. You are remarkably opinionated about Parliament. I have grown more measured since. You misspelled tyranny 4 times in one entry. He sat down across from her. The chair creaked. The chair always creaked when he sat in it, and she had come to associate that sound with safety, with the specific gravity of his presence in a room. His skin was still cold. He still did not breathe. But something had changed in the months since the dinner party. Something she recognized only in her pulse but could feel. The way one feels the season turning before the calendar confirms it. He was warmer. Not physically. His skin remained its marble chill, but in some other register, some frequency she had not known she could detect. The flowers in the hallway had not wilted since she arrived. Phelps tells me Gerald has withdrawn his complaint, she said. Phelps tells everyone everything. It is his only flaw, and his greatest virtue. The separation papers will be final by June. Cassius was quiet. Then he said, When they are, I would like to ask you a question. She looked up from the journal. His hands, those ancient, careful hands, were fidgeting with his cufflink again. You may ask it now, she said. It is a better question in June. She smiled. It was the smile she had kept folded away for years, the one that used her whole face. And he watched it the way he watched sunrise from behind curtains, as something precious and slightly dangerous that he had spent a long time learning not to need. Phelps appeared with a second cup of tea and a plate of toast. Mrs. Darnley sends her regards, he said. She has accepted the position as cook here, effective Monday. She says to tell you that she will not tolerate anyone entering her kitchen without permission, including immortal lords who cannot work the stove." "Noted," Cassius said. Rowena returned to the journal. Cassius drank his tea, which he did not need but had learned to enjoy for the warmth and the ritual, and the way she looked at him over the rim of her own cup. As though she was still cataloging him, still adding to her list. But the heading had changed from anomalies to something else, something she had not yet named, but which made her stay in the chair, and him in his. The library full of the quiet, specific sound of two people occupying the same space by choice. Outside, the March wind pressed against the windows, and the first crocuses were pushing through the frozen ground, and the house, that old, patient house, settled around them like a sigh. "Cassius?" she said, not looking up from the page. "Yes. Lady Margaret, in the portrait. How long were you married?" He was quiet for a very long time. 11 years. And then she grew old. And I did not. Rowena set down the journal. She looked at him, at the face that had not changed since 1558, at the hands that would not age, at the gray eyes that had watched centuries pass, and everyone in them leave. "You misspelled tyranny again in 1651, she said. "I was under considerable stress in 1651. I have made a correction in pencil." "Of course you have." She turned the page. He watched her turn it. Outside, the first crocuses were pushing through the frozen ground. Then Phelps appeared in the doorway. His face had the expression she had never seen on him. Not composure, not dry amusement, but something closer to alarm. "There is a woman at the gate," he said. "She says her name is Margaret." Cassius's teacup shattered on the floor.